Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rash's World. Today we have a special guest. We have Elaine Hoem. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. And
Wonderful. So, how would you briefly introduce yourself? And that's a question I ask all the people on my podcast. What would you say?
well, I live in Reno, Nevada currently. Prior to being in Reno, lived at Lake Tahoe, and prior to that, I raised my kids in Carson City. So I've been in Nevada for a long time. My background is that of a psychotherapist. Um, I was a marriage and family therapist, and so I loved working with families and kids and anybody who came to my office, really. I also got interested in transpersonal psychology along the way, and also in the philosophy and the practice of yoga. And so combining the therapy and the yoga is what constitutes my book, Everyday Soul Dances.
And that's what we're
So
going to talk
it's my
about.
life. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, I interrupt you. So, the book you're mentioning is Everyday Soul Dances, a guide to soulful living in the midst of uncertain times. And it really feels, just from the title, this is a book we need for our times. And I would agree with it because I've read it, and it is a book that is very helpful and useful for our times. So I'd like to just mention that I like the mention of soul, which is often people avoid those terms because of connotations to spirituality and religion, and especially soulful living, which is not the same as mindful living. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. That's a very interesting distinction. Yes, yes.
And so mindfulness is something we talk about and I do encourage, but I feel like soulful goes even deeper than that because the mind also has its limits. But when you look at the soul, it actually includes the mind and goes beyond it. So how would you define it in this case?
Well, quite an interesting to start to our conversation. Um, I agree with you. Mindfulness is about taming our minds and being aware of our thoughts and what we choose to think, which is so important because our minds are great friends, but also can be our enemies because the thoughts can run away with it. So that's where mindfulness comes in. I take the soul, or I see the soul as more comprehensive. It includes all of our being. It includes our background, our karmas, our lives paths, and our spiritual dimensions. And that's the difference, I think, with mindfulness, because for me, it's all about accessing the spirit, because the spirit is alive within us. Our God selves are alive within us. And once we know that, then we are no longer stuck. Oh, I have to get this done. This is uh, so stressful. That kind of mentality is how we run around most of the time. But when we realize that we're in communion with our divinity, then that changes the story. And I write about how we can change that story through psychological practices and also spiritual ones. And once we do that, then we can stay more centered, or we can come back to center and back to holiness once we lose our way. And we lose our way all the time because we're human and it's our learning process. But the fact that we have this other dimension that's within us and so available to us is so beautiful, and it's so profound, and it's where our creativity comes in. It's where we know that we're more than human beings, we're spiritual beings. And so it's exponentially greater than anything we can imagine within our individual selves.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. We can think of it as the onion. And so you have the peel, which is basically the mind worrying about the past, worrying about the future. And this is the state where most of us are at, because we're constantly thinking about this, what could happen, and so on. And often it's not as bad as we think it is. So we just exaggerate, worry. And then there's mindfulness, which I think is then the moment, which is also important, like living in this moment. But then there is the soulful one, which encompasses everything and goes deeper into that. There's more than to this moment, or even this life in many ways, where we expand it and we're part of the whole thing. So I think it's wonderful to look past that and not getting stuck even in the moment, because the moment might not be good, right? So we just have that confidence and faith that there is more to it, that maybe the suffering of this moment does serve a certain purpose or a moment of growth and learning, or maybe there's a reason behind it. And I'd like to dive into the idea of past lives and karma a little bit with you here.
Well, yes, because we are, it's great that you said we're so much greater than who we are in the moment, because in the moment we can lose our way and feel horrible. We're multidimensional beings, and that's what is so exciting to me about who we are as a humanity. It's not that just you're a guy and I'm a woman. It's that at this other level, every single one of us is connected. We're all brothers and sisters to one another. St. Francis said that long time ago. And if we know that, then there aren't any good guys and bad guys. And the way the yogis explain it is that we all have karma that we've accumulated either in this lifetime or previous ones, and that the karma sets up our ego and our persona and where we live and how we live and who we're in a relationship to, which may or may not be all that good. And so one of the aspects of this lifetime's journey is to let go of all of the negative karma that we have created. You know, we're set up in a particular lifetime to undo certain karmas, and we apparently our soul unites with other souls to make agreements that this is what we're going to work on. So if we know that, then we're going to work on those things. And if we can heal karma and learn to do things differently, then we're more in touch with our soul. And if we realize that we all are here to undo negative karma and to learn how to love better, then for me, it really helps me understand some of the craziness in our world and some of the people who seem to be so out of control. And so rather than dismissing them and saying, oh, they're horrible people, no, they're people that have a lot of public karma often to undo, and they may be serving a purpose to help other people look at their ways and hopefully wake up. The waking up part is so important, because once we wake up, all of it's like taking like a snake shedding its skin or taking off the costume. It's like, oh, I don't have to wear that anymore. And instead, I'm in this pure being, or there'll be the other karma I'll be working on, but it'll be different. And it's all about getting closer and closer to our God, goddess self. To know that within us is this infinite, beautiful, magnificent, outstanding being, and that we're a part of that. I am, you are, everybody else is. And so we're all moving towards the light, and we all are at different levels. The other part about karma is that there's karma that we create in this lifetime. And so it could be negative or it could be positive. If it's negative, hopefully we'll wake up. Our minds will say, wait a minute, that's not okay. And then we will do whatever we need to do. Maybe it's get therapy. Maybe it's to resolve relationship issues. It could be all kinds of things. And again, it's letting go of the energies that keep us bound. keep us feeling human and out of control and stressed. And so I always like take a big breath
Yeah.
and open to the possibilities that we're more than we think we are in this moment.
But the moment is again hugely important because that's when the realization would come, and it's and not like waiting for the future, so it will come then. It has to be right now at this moment when people watching us, they might get suddenly an insight or inspiration, and that is really the spark that we need in the moment. And as you mentioning the different dimension, I remember a book I saw as an undergrad student which fascinated me, and I think it's called Powers of 10, and you see like the atoms, like the closest we can microscopic look, we can look at what it looks like, and we go deep into it, and then it kept zooming out by powers of 10 until we get to like the sky, and we see a person's hand, and it just further zooms out, and then once you get to the highest we can reach, it's exactly the same image that was the first one. So when the inner and the outer kind of combine, if you go deep into something, you end up outside of everything, which I found fascinating. So there's like a spirituality that connects it, whether you go deep in or you go deep outside, it's basically the same thing. So that fascinated me. And I think what reading your book too, there are two things I loved, and especially it brought to mind, to consciousness of how our relationships are often a way of learning for us. And even the ones that are bad, especially the ones that are bad, where we have the opportunity to grow from it and learn and not repeat the same pattern on one side. And the other thing, when you again talked about where we judge people, where evil people, quote unquote, and then we forget that maybe in our past life, and you mentioned that, we were on the other side and we were the one who was oppressing others, and now we're the victim. So it's kind of like also a cycle that we would go through lives, and if that was us in a previous lifetime, then we can't really judge them because that's the process that we all need to go through.
We can't judge them. And what you're saying is that we take a broader view
Mhm.
of humanity, of who we all are. And in that way, we can have so much more compassion. And our world needs that.
Mhm.
You know, if we have compassion, we're not judging, we're not pointing guns at somebody else. We really don't have enemies. There might be bad people doing bad things to us, but this larger view of who we are at the soul level, we all have souls. Some of
Whether we
them,
believe it or not, we do, yeah, in
yeah,
many ways, yeah,
believe that.
yeah.
Yes. Uh, and Gary Zukav did such a great job talking about this in The Seat of the Soul, which is a book way back, I think, in, I don't know, the 80s or 90s. But he talked about we're all moving towards the light. Some of us are here, some of us are here, some of us are way back here. And, you know, who knows how many lifetimes we need to do the growing to be able to merge more into the light. However, today, there are so many programs like yours and so many books to read that I see a lot of humanity waking up to who we really are and why we're here and how we can help one another grow, but also really pay attention to what's going on inside and do something about it, you know, either in terms of helping others or resolve something within ourselves.
But I think there's also the distinction between judgment and responsibility. And I think that we are all responsible, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we realize it or not, to an extent. Again, some people more than others, I am aware of that. But there is that responsibility that we have towards others and towards ourselves. And I think we often overlook that. And if we try to avoid that, what can I do in this situation? Or what led me to this situation without judgment? You can do it without judgment. I think that is an important lesson. So to separate the two. And the person who does evil acts is responsible for it. Now, there might be reasons why, but I find that they're responsible for this, but they have the chance of learning from it. And as you say, waking up. And that is such an important moment. And many of us struggle with that. So, how can we wake that up and say, you know what? I am responsible for many things that, not everything, of course, but many things that are within my reach that I can control. And again, I love the serenity prayer. It's like the difference that between what I can control and what I cannot. But many people overlook the amount of control they actually do have in many ways.
Well, there are two answers for that. And the first is, well, probably more than two, but the first is to do a lot of soul searching. I love to journal. And journaling is a great way to pinpoint what we may have missed during the day or what we need to keep learning, what we're feeling that we didn't recognize as we walk through our days. So what we can do, and I often write, okay, what is the truth of this? And what do I need to do for my part? The spiritual part, though, in addition, is this person I'm having a conflict with. I might not be able to directly influence that person, but I can pray. I can pray for myself. I can pray for the other person. I can pray for the good of all. I can pray for the good of all people that get caught in these situations, because we all do. And that's the soul part, because our words and our intentions are energy, and the energy goes out into the world, and potentially it can change the story. We don't have to know how the other person responds, but it's very healing to see the larger picture.
And I've
Tell
experienced
myself and the other person.
And I've experienced that when people are angry and maybe they're angry with me. And if my response is one of anger too, and I feel triggered, then it just escalates. But I've had the opposite where I felt at peace with myself. And then my response was not one of anger, but a calmness, a peace. And it affected them. And I saw the person's anger kind of like either went away, or they just thought like, I'm not going to waste my time with this guy because he's not responding to my provocation. And I think that is the responsibility that we, all of us, have to respond to these moments with calm, with peace, without drawing conclusions or jumping to conclusions, and just taking that moment. It's like, okay, this person is venting, that's fine. Probably it's not even about me, they might even not know me, but if even if they do, not taking everything so personally. But I find like today, and you say uncertain times, and I think it's also very like defensive times. Everyone seems to be on the defensive. You mentioned something and it might be misconstrued in many ways. And I think we just need to take a breath and relax on a simple basis.
It's often not that easy. However, if we have the practice of, I need to breathe, I need to slow down, I need to take some time before I react. I do journaling so I can understand my part. What is it I really need to say to this other person, coming from a loving heart rather than a defensive, ego-bound posture? A lot of our spiritual journey is dropping the ego.
And the two systems, right, that Daniel Kahneman talks about, system one, the fast-like thinking, where we respond to the moment, and then the one where we just slow down and process and take it in and evaluate things, the second system. And I think we really, and meditation can help with that, but even in daily life, where you say, okay, I have an option now. I can immediately respond or not. I found that with emails too. I get an email and the first moment it's like, I got to respond to this because I got triggered, or I'm angry. And I say, no, let's take a few moments and let's not regret the action, because if I do that in the moment, it's probably going to come out all wrong. And sometimes it's also misunderstanding that I would have overreacted to. So it is hard, but it's that moment where you hear that tiny voice, the intuition, the spirit within that says, hold on, just wait a few seconds, take a deep breath. I think that's really necessary towards then more and more freedom in our lives.
Well, that's where our growth lies, right? When we can do that, then we wake up, and then we have many more options in terms of how we want to handle something. And that's what I really like about this process, because we are taking full responsibility and we're working internally enough to come up with a better response, one that's more healing, one that's not defensive, one that allows for back and forth communication. And all of that can change stories. It sounds like a simple communication process, but it's so much more.
Yeah, and so exactly, and so much also depends on how we feel about ourselves, like the relationship we have with ourselves. Because if you do love yourself, and if you do forgive yourself, and if you feel okay with yourself, then that's gonna project to the outside world. But if you're not, then anything will be complicated, even relationships, because then you are not in sync with the other person. You're not hearing them. You overreact to situations. And I think it's really our responsibility to connect with that, like you say. And I think I love the term of dharma, that doing your duty, and even further, we say consecration, to dedicate yourself to a higher purpose, whatever that may be. But in order to get to the dharma, we first have to know, what is it? And again, what would be the definition of dharma here for our audience? What would you say?
Well, in the ancient yogic traditions, really, they write about what is your spiritual duty?
Mhm.
What is your spiritual thrust in this lifetime? Why are you here from a spiritual perspective? And of course, there are many answers to that. I was here to raise these amazing human beings.
Mhm.
I was here to do therapy with all kinds of people. And then there's more to the story. I'm here because it's my spiritual duty to take what I've learned and share it with others. And so we all have a dharma, a spiritual duty in a particular lifetime. However, this is Eastern philosophy, and I have not read or heard about that outside of Eastern philosophy. I'm probably too limited in my knowledge, I'm not sure, but it's so important. If we know that we're here for a spiritual reason, that changes the story about who we are.
Mhm. What happens is we have all these filters, that the way we see the world, and we have all these classifications and definitions. And you mentioned earlier, like a man and a woman, and then maybe like nationalities and religious beliefs and so on, and race. And it gets really complicated then. But we get kind of stuck in those definitions. And I think it's way beyond that. And as someone who, I don't necessarily have one identity in terms of nationality, because I've lived across the world. I was born in one place, lived in another place, and I'm married with a person from another culture. So it really opened up my mind of like, it's not that limiting. It's not just saying like, I am this, and at the exclusion of others. And that experience has taught me that we have more things in common than we think. And we need to be careful not to see people in just very limited ways, which leads to the ideas, again, or a practice of stereotypes and stereotyping and all that, because we see it only through one lens. And that can exist at any form, in any shape, from any person, right? So just kind of looking past that and seeing the spirit behind it all, the person behind all the other illusion that we see, right?
Well, all of that is of the mind, who we are culturally, this culture versus this culture. That's where meditation comes in. That's where spirituality comes in. Because if we only respond to mind, heart, body, then we see ourselves as this limited human being.
Mhm.
But we also have all these subtle bodies, and that's where we all relate to one another. You and I look very different, but at the soul level, I don't know that we're that different. And so meditation is clearing the mind, opening the mind, making the mind spacious so that you see this
Mhm.
in which everything is included.
Mhm.
It's not only that we are all one, but we are all one with everything.
Yeah.
That is so exciting,
Yeah.
because then I can go out in my patio and have communion with the roses. They're absolutely gorgeous this year because we have so much snow and rain,
Mhm.
and so I can open my eyes to the beauty all around me. And it's not just within one person and another. It's so much more than that. So it's all about how expansive can our minds become.
Yeah.
And
Not
that's what,
getting trapped. Yeah, not getting trapped in the black and white thinking or us versus them mentality. James Cameron had an interview that I very much liked, and he talked about how we care about family members. So we have this circle and we care about them. And then we can expand it to we care about our nation, people of this country. But let's expand it further. And if we can expand it so far that this circle includes everyone, now that is spirituality. And but we get stuck. We get stuck at one point, and it's like us versus them, and me against the other. But once we eliminate that and we expand that circle and include them as well, I mean, that's the perfect outcome.
well, and we can expand further. We can expand
Exactly.
out into the cosmos.
Yes,
This
yes.
is our world.
Yeah,
All of
there's no
these
limit.
billions of stars and the black holes and the galaxies, and it's astonishing. And
Yeah.
if we can see ourselves as I'm one speck, I'm one part of that, and you're another part. The stars are another part. There are a gazillion stories about who we are. We're so amazingly fascinating and huge in what we can take in,
Yeah.
versus, oh, I don't like that person because she wore these colors and they're just like mine, or whatever we get into,
Mhm, mhm.
the little ways.
I love
So
that. Yeah. Sorry.
go ahead.
I love the term you use of body temple too, because it's this body through which we experience things, and this body that connects us with our karma, where we can release it, where we can turn the negative into the positive. And when you look at spiritual beings like the Buddha, like Jesus, who had bodies, and they didn't in most cases, even the Buddha did not like. But religion changed that a bit. But I think like really appreciating the body as a temple, and this is the tool with which I can do a lot of things, and that my spirit talks through, and not mortifying the body, or not shaming it, or not feeling bad about the body itself. I don't look like this. I want to look like that. And I think we get kind of stuck with that in our relationship with our body, but it can be so much more. And meditation kind of helps that connection, like rebuilding that connection and trust between the body and the mind, and seeing it really as one thing.
In the yogic traditions, they talk about the body as the temple
Mhm,
that houses our
mhm,
spiritual self, the
mhm,
God self,
mhm.
goddess self,
Yeah,
and that self resides in the heart. Jesus said the same thing. The kingdom
yeah,
of God is within.
yeah.
So if I see my body as a temple and can keep that awareness at the forefront of my mind, I'm going to take better care of it. I'm going to make better choices.
Mhm.
And a lot of that stuff you're talking about just falls away. This is my body. It's
Yeah.
my unique part of this whole cosmic thing that we're all engaged in,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it was
it's
meant
my
to be this way
musical
for whatever
instrument.
reason.
It's my
I'm
musical
sorry.
instrument. It's my musical instrument with which I will play. And I want
Yes.
to get to the idea of dances, which I love very much. That kind of idea of like of dance, because it's not just a lesson. It's not something. It's just something that's joyful. And dancing is something that really does not have any specific purpose. It doesn't have a goal. And Alan Watts talks about that. Is when you're dancing, you don't think I'm going to dance from this place to this place. We just enjoy that moment and go with the flow and with the rhythm of things, and we lose that. And that's my problem with a lot of self-help. It's like say personal growth or improvement. It's always like I want to be better and better and better, which is again, losing that moment. And I like the term dance because it's really fully enjoying the moment. And I think that is to a large extent why we're here, to enjoy our time in life together and not be distracted by things that are not important or that are even harmful to our own psyche as well as body.
It's so interesting because in order to do that, we have to know that we're spiritual beings.
Yeah.
We cannot do that from the ego.
Yeah.
From the ego, it's like, oh, when I leave here, I have to, or oh, I have this relationship, it's a mess, And when we criticize ourselves that way, we lose that preciousness that you're talking about. And again, it's like, okay, let's open to our spiritual being and let's see how far we can take it. Let's see how much we're given once we're in this other state. And then that's where it becomes phenomenal and so beautiful. There's so much more inside of us, even than there is on the outside. But we get caught up in these other things because that's how we live our ordinary lives. Have to do this,
Mm-hmm. And even that question of what if this moment is perfect the way it is, and asking ourselves that instead of thinking of I'm lacking this, I could have a better job, or I could have more money, or this and that. What if this moment is perfect the way it is? And once you get that, it's kind of like a belief. It's like I don't have to get better or change or become someone else. I am fine. Change a relationship. I am fine in this moment. Just that it doesn't mean that it's not something that's constant, but even for a few moments, that would be really energizing oneself. And then now I can choose. Now I can choose the path I really want to take. Whereas if we get kind of caught up in all these like struggles that we have and negativity and so on, then we can't advance in many ways.
That could be a spiritual practice in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
This moment is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do to make the next moment perfect?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where our mind comes in. That's where we have choices. Well, I need to rush around and finish cleaning the house. Or I may choose to clean the house, but do it in a way that feels perfect. Or I may take a break and go outside and listen to the birds and have another perfect moment. That's a great practice. You should write about it.
And I like you mentioned it in your book, from being like hyperactive to being inert spectators. And these seem to be the two options. Either I have to do a lot of things or I do nothing. And we need that kind of balance too, of like, well, let's do something, but let's meet somewhere in between, of not being too active, but also not being too passive. And I think that's important. And many people are just driven by hyperactivity. And that's why it leads to burnout, because they're not listening to their bodies. It's telling them, or their minds, so it's telling them, you need to slow down. You are doing too much, or you're distracting yourself from various issues. You're escaping them, which can lead to things like addiction, which comes in many forms. And you mentioned that you can be addicted to your work, you can be addicted to exercise, you can be addicted to a good nutrition, and that's also something that some people suffer from. And it's really finding that kind of balance and not being driven by things.
One of the chapters I have 4 chapters in the book that talk about spiritual qualities that are important for us to have. One of them is constancy, which means I'm going to follow through, make a commitment to see this to its rightful conclusion. Another one is contemplation, and that's where your talk comes in, is if we take a moment to breathe, or even 20 minutes to breathe and to write about what's happening here and what can I do better, how can I make a shift, then it's not like, oh, how do I be better? It's, what do I need to do to come into spiritual alignment and wholeness? And that's what's important. And that's where the consecration comes in. It's like, I'm going to do my life in a way that I see the divine living within me, as something to honor and grow with and communicate with and learn from. And so that's where the spirituality comes in, is anytime we can stop and go inside instead of, oh, I have to get all this done out here.
Yeah. And it's innate, and it's within us, that kind of like sacred consciousness they talk, it's within us. So kind of like in when the Buddha became enlightened, just realized, oh, this was always within me. And as you mentioned, Jesus, the kingdom is within us. So we all can have access to it, but it's kind of sleeping, it's dormant, and we need to wake it up. And it's important to do so. This is not something to take lightly. It's really important as we look around in the state of the world today. If we could really connect with that, we can not only have peace for ourselves, but for others as well and around us. And it has a very positive effect on others too.
I was talking to a woman who has a social work background, and she said, oh, Elaine, what are we going to do to change this messed up world? And I don't see it that way. I see that we change this messed up world within ourselves and then the world of the people that are around us. And then we're doing our dharma.
Yeah, one at a time. That's
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
One person cannot change the messed up world. And so to put energy into thinking, oh, I have to do that, time's running out, that doesn't take us where we need to go.
I want to go full cycle to homecoming, returning home, and you mentioned that in your book. What would you say about that? The return home, and what is home? And it's not just talking about where you're from, your nationality. We're talking about much deeper than that, right?
Yeah.
So how would you define home? Yeah, sorry.
Home can be many, many places. That our truest home is our spiritual home within, where everything is totally fine once we know, oh, I'm home and I'm grateful and I'm going to rest in this state for a while. Then it's possible for us to have many homes in different places in the world, because if we can hold on to this state, then we can hold on to this state when we take a trip to Africa or New Zealand or, wherever. And that means we're just enriching our home. It can be very, very broad, very big.
And home is where the heart is. Yeah, home is where the heart is, and that's exactly it. And Elaine Hoem, thank you so much for being on Arash's World. You're an author, psychotherapist, meditation teacher, life coach, and many other things as well, as I can tell. And your book is Everyday Soul Dances: A Guide to Soulful Living in the Midst of Uncertain Times, a book that I highly recommend. Thank you so much for being here on Arash's World and sharing your light and wisdom with everyone.
Thank you so much, Arash. Namaste.
Take care.